Now, the next keynote is Franklin Moraes. He's a civil and electronic engineer who has led development teams in private commercial software for scientific applications. He pioneered in the early 1980s the use of finite element methods for structural engineering and microcomputing. And since the 1990s, the development of commercial off-the-shelf private hardware and software systems for smart buildings, urban spaces, and cities. He has been a professor at Porto's Higher Schools of Architecture since 2001, where he also leads a group dedicated to formal methods in architecture. He was also behind the creation of the Formal Methods in Architecture Symposium back in 2011, I think, and has been a key figure in its maintenance and growth over the last 13 years. Today he brings us a talk entitled The Role of AI in the Future of Society, the City, Construction, and Architecture.
In the last years, but much more. I think we thought that that was something that has to be presented here. Some ideas on the relationship between architecture and artificial intelligence. Well, I tried to use artificial intelligence to produce my paper, and it's recorded. It's recorded. I used not my voice, a synthesized voice, and many synthesized images. But well, I come back from that joke, and I'm presenting something more near what is usual in this type of situations. So, well, the presentation, well, this is remnants of the record presentation. It's much less than this. Don't be afraid, or maybe you should. I'm trying to deal with the three situations, three relations between architecture and AI. First is that AI creates new situations in the world that are relevant to the architect, to the city, to the house, and the architect must be ready to deal with that new situations. The second is that architect must introduce the AI tools in what he produces in the built environment. This team I will present only very few topics, and the third, it will be the main one. It's well what we are discussing here, and how the new AI technologies will be adopted by the architects in the profession and the professional practice. Sorry. Okay. Well, since the beginning of the Industrial Revolution, labor productivity, the most interesting indicator of development of the human species, is growing exponentially. First, substitution of the source of energies. Second, mechanization. I'm wrong, sorry, again. Yes. First, substitution of the source of energies. Second, mechanization. And third, automation are the precedents of a maybe fourth phase tied to the digital and maybe the AI. Certain is an acceleration of productivity due also to AI. Increase in productivity means more increased production and decreased labor. It therefore seems like a bright future. We will have more wealth and work less and less. In the long presentation, I called attention to some setbacks of the productivity revolution, but I will concentrate now in this one. In the future, if the future is bright, why then those recent strikes of Hollywood workers or American dockers explicitly against the application of AI in their activities? Well, because some fear that less work means not less hours of work, but less employed workers. Well, I am an incorrigible optimist and I believe in the radiant future. But what I believe comes not out of faith, but for scientifically based reasons. There is a paradigmatic historical scene. At the time of Ptolemaic Egypt, Aaron of Alexandria proposed to the pharaoh of Egypt the Aelipil. Is that right, Tassus? A steam engine that made the palace doors open, anticipating the Industrial Revolution by almost 2 millennia. Upon Aaron's presentation, the pharaoh would have argued, "Friend Aaron, this is very nice, but what do I do with my slaves?" Well, we know that many centuries later, Aeolipile developments wiped out slaves. The conjunction of the capitalist mode of production with the Industrial Revolution not only did not need slaves, but slavery was even counterproductive to its development, which, for example, needed free men to its factories and also customers for its products. Generally speaking, the laws of the science of history tell us that the development of productive forces is a trigger for historical development. When this development comes into conflict with the relations of production, it is a productive force that wins. All the present or future Aelipiles will eventually free all the slaves of the present or of the future. That's why I'm optimistic. If our time has to choose between new technologies and their promises on one side, and current production relations on the other, it will maintain technological developments and throw away social relations as always history did. Last day we were talking about the politicians not listening to the researchers. Well, in a historical long-term basis, it's actually the researcher that changed radically the world of the humans. Let's focus on the not so long future consequences of increased productivity for the concerns of architecture. I think they could bring about radical changes. It's time to think about it. The first one is the transformation of the workplace towards automated, assisted, more creative work, in which productivity is not assured at the expense of the physiological, psychological, and social well-being of those who work. Sorry. Well, the second change arises from ICT and remote worker capabilities, with a significant change in the geographic location of the workplace, which could be anywhere and implies a functional mix of other locations, including the housing. The third change arises from the increase in free time, which will give rise to new types of human activity with their new architectural programs, an important change in the use of the current one. The fourth, and extremely important in terms of city space, is the emergence of autonomous vehicles, which can drastically reduce the city's occupation by motorized vehicles, in addition to freeing humans from millions of hours of driving, reduce emissions, increase road safety. The fifth concerns the application of ICT systems, many of them autonomous and intelligent, to the entire built environment, smart cities and smart buildings, especially for two major changes regarding architecture. First, what is still essentially a set of lockish, static and passive elements and devices is giving way to the appearance of active and changeable systems, responding quickly to changing situations, adjusting in real time to the needs of the customer. And second, the interaction between the built environment and its users is being transformed. Humans act differently. They provide real-time motivations to the built environment, often without explicit declaration by the human, through autonomous perception of artificial agents. They delegate, albeit in an assist manner, the execution and management of the built environment on intelligent machines and maintain an increased exchange of information with those machines. But there are more generic great problems that influence the concerns of the architecture of today, not by direct responsibility of the AI. The first is the accelerated growth of previously dependent economies. The global south has seen rapid urbanization in recent decades, with the world population reaching the urban majority very recently. According to the UN, in 2020, 3 billion people will require adequate and affordable housing by 2030. And approximately 1 billion people live in informal settlements and slums around the world. The second is that the West has fallen into a recurring situation of economic and financial crisis that has greatly affected the housing sector. The subprime crisis of 2008, which continues today, was just a symptom of the model's deficiency, which has been getting worse. The third is productivity in construction industry. The construction sector, for the reasons that are not yet well studied, is one of the human activities in which the benefits of the Industrial Revolution have been least felt. In mobility, the global cost of transporting a person or a ton of goods per kilometer, including travel times, has decreased thousands of times from classical antiquity to the present day. In clothing, a shirt takes hundreds of times less time for producers to manufacture. In construction, there is nothing like it. Production costs, the time have not changed anything like that in millennia. Mass production, mechanization, automation, and other solutions found in other industries have not reached any of the levels found in these other sectors. The fourth is sustainability. Construction is responsible for the use of most natural resources in weight and volume, and will be the second large transformer of the natural landscape in area, with buildings responsible for 17.5% of emissions with a greenhouse effect, to which we can add those produced by the construction phase, maybe 3%. Urbanism and territorial planning still have some responsibilities with 16% more via transport systems. Last, we could not fail to highlight the situation of war with massive destruction of built heritage, and the million of people who are currently leaving the places where they were rooted, crossing one or more borders, and their weak situations of sheltering in place of origin, destination, and often in transit. Well, this is a small summary of what I just said. Till now, we have seen our first great topic, how AI and other factors change the world, and consequently, what are the concerns of architecture. Let's now deal briefly with the second theme. how architecture uses AI in the world. Looking at everything mentioned in topic 1, it appears that in most cases, architecture is a passive and subservient spectator. Teleworking comes from ICT sector, autonomous vehicles from the automotive industry, smart cities and buildings from ICT and electrical industry. Most sustainable solutions in construction come from the construction materials industry. If the latter is still influenced by architecture, the others are completely unrelated to it. Why has architecture never designed a traffic light? As a test, I asked some IA machines to give me an image of a traffic light designed by an architect. And that is the reason. Yeah. However, architecture is interested in being integrated into the design of AI applications in construction and smart cities buildings. Well, I think here at least 2 of the interventions demonstrate the interest of architects in new production modes of and more productive modes of production of built environment. So I think maybe we architects, I'm not an architect, sorry, but the architects are in the good move. Well, I'm passing this. And this, it was a AI generated history. Well, I'm not explaining why is William Shakespeare in the monkeys and the monkeys. Well, the third topic, introducing of AI tools in the architect's professional practice, is what we are doing in this symposium. You will let me develop something about it. This is a model based on something I developed many and many years ago for my PhD on electronic engineering for intelligent agents in smart space and buildings. I then adapted it for this symposium, adjusting it for the architectural practice. It's different, but always the same base, as it actually is a model of rationality, human or artificial. The model is nothing extraordinary. It may seem too complex, but it's very similar to most presented here. I saw many of your presentations, and well, the general ideas are almost the same. It gathered theories from psychology, stimuli, motivations, knowledge, decisions, nothing really new. Okay. Well, most of the living beings have a relation with its environment or world that is of actions over the world produced by stimuli of the world over the living being. The internal process is very simple: reflex, instincts, intuition, and so on. In humans and also artificial intelligent agents, the internal process is very complicated. The mental processes that mediate between stimuli and actions are grouped in 4 zones: word learning, society learning, action plan, and decision processes. That performs the sequence: stimulum triggers motivation, decision process tries to solve the problem with decision methods, immediate policies. If not, it consults the deductive learning machine for knowledge necessary for creating a solution, creates a plan of actions, and acts. The word learning process creates 2 knowledge bases: a body of socially consolidated theoretical knowledge, most of the time persistent, abstract, potential, and declarative, and a body of knowledge about the state of the world, volatile, concrete, and current. The learning process has three major pathways. Inductive, through the treatment of empirical data that are acquired through the senses. The deductive, which transforms established knowledge into new knowledge. And acquired, which stores the exchange of knowledge between the various actors. Well, this is important because nobody refers to the acquired, but the acquired is the main exchange of information we have. It's transmitting information each other. What I acquire, it's transmitted to you, and socially, the most important information is socially based and transmitted without the need for each agent to proceed to his own induction and his own deduction. The results are the referred bodies of knowledge expressed in more or less formal language. This knowledge can have different characteristics according to its duration, of veracity, persistent or volatile, abstraction. Well, I'm passing this. These various processes are also carried out at various paces. Those for creating theories is very slow, but the detection of the state of the world is functioning quickly and permanently. Well, the learning process of society reached a set of motivations. These motivations are usually expressed in the customer program or the brief. Then it's necessary to frame individual motivations on social motivations, which can be defined practically in the regulations, but which have many other ways of expressing themselves, for example, ideologies. The introduction of human or social motivation in the model is of the most importance. There is no decision based only on knowledge, on pure science. Actions are only triggered by motivations and are evaluated by motivations. Of course, knowledge influences motivation. For example, it's the science that asserts that some desire is feasible or not, and that, of course, certainly affects the motivation. Thus, it's right, who claims for values, human or social, in the agents of artificial intelligence? When they are not explicit, they are hidden, because it's not possible to decide what the evaluation/motivation. It's not good to be hidden. So the social motivation or personal motivation should be declared explicitly. Another thing, because it's there. There is no way not to be there. Another thing, the learning process learns an external thing that is human. That is humans. Well, that means that the agent learns what humans want, learns motivations, does not impose motivations. But architecture does not just accept the program of the client. First, because the client's brief is generally very incomplete. It can be expressed in multiple ways. For example, and in order of complexity, emotions, objectives, utilities, and policies. If you have the fact that societies are not consensuous, but conflicting, in which there are different motivations in dispute, it's concluded that architecture must define many of the undeclared motivations and take sides between them. Just an example of what we say. The choice between an architecture for the society of waste or a sustainable architecture is on the table of contemporary ideological discussions. That an architect put his own motivations in the process, it's almost impossible to avoid. But it is very difficult to accept that an AI agent makes the same thing. The action plan is embodied in what usually called the project. It's, sorry. Yes. The action plan is embodied in what is usually called the project, which is intended to be a plan of actions to be carried out by its executors, expressed in sufficiently consolidated language and dominated and dominated by the various stakeholders. Between the motivations and the state of the world on the one and the action plan on the other, there is no direct line, and it's precisely here that the most complex process appears. So that means that the human being is rational. He takes decisions. It's not a stimulus reaction or action immediate without a complex model of thinking. Well, it's that of decision. In a rational decision process, it is intended that the material action to be developed based on the project changes the external material environment to one that satisfies human motivations. Rationality is as here defined as a methodology that effectively controls the production of futures. The various formal methods and AI tools in use in architecture are used in several points of this model. Yes, this is the first one, or two of them have already been mentioned above because they are on the frontier of architecture as the interface between all stakeholders and the mental design process. CAD, BIM, especially for the other technicians in the design and construction process. Its extensions of virtual presentation in near reality renderings and mixed realities as communication tools with the users of the built environment. CAM is also used to produce reduced model as a communication language between the various actors. All of these methods are widely used as means of communication between the various digital process and the architect himself. Well, in the area of learning, we have, for example, sensory acquisition and first semantic treatment of empirical data, tracking, mapping, computer video, photogrammetry, several sensors technologies, and so on and so on. Semantic treatment of empirical big data to more or less deep theoretical levels of the knowledge, AI machine learning techniques, and I will use this slide in a few moments. More formal language for storing information about the state of the world, BIMs, various mapping technologies. Ontologies. This language can be semantically flattered with a grammar that allows simple semantics or can extend to language based on logic and allowing the organization of semantically advanced and complex theories. For example, what we call ontologies in computer science. Language suitable for certain theories. This language simultaneously combine knowledge of the world theories and adapted decision machines. Declarative semantics plus production machine, space syntax, agent-based, beam checker, structure, climate, fluid mechanics, traffic, and so on. In action, we have CAM that can transform a plan into concrete material construction actions from building materials to large robotic building construction system. Well, the decision-making process is certainly the most important and complex and deserves a little more analysis efforts. In the decision-making process, we essentially have two different cycles, the synthesis and the validation cycles. In the synthesis cycle, there are machines that have production grammars for the project, such as processing, generative programming, parametricism, shape grammars, artificial intelligence machines. The importance of decision methods cannot be underestimated. because they are condensed from theories and motivations, easy to evaluate, because they have the form of production rules. That is, knowledge that is also time persistent, abstract, and potential as theories, but they are not declarative, but methodological, operational. Although less abstract and less general than theories, they are directly applicable and are much faster. That means that artificial agent, AI agent, have most of these logical apparatus, but when it acts, it's, well, the motivations and the changes in the world go directly to those sorry, to those grammars of production of solutions. Those are very quick because they are already compiled from the other. For example, it's here that we put shape grammars or something. An example, when motivation, we are thirsty. Well, we are not going to the theories, see what are our physiology, or biology, and the quality of the materials to provide, well, something that could end our thirst. Well, we know because, well, our parents said when we are little that if you are thirsty, drink water. This is a grammar, a generative grammar applicated in a very simple case. We don't make all the reasoning each moment. We have rules. We call in these processes. Sorry. Well, for later. However, the production grammars can be very different in terms of semantic capacity. At a lower limit is, for example, the technique behind parametricism. The ability to automatically generate architectural forms. These automated shape production processes were a fashion within the architectural poetics of a few years ago and still retain their cultivators. Although they produce architectural forms, their decisions are not semantically oriented. The generated forms do not tend to respond to human motivations or states of the world and are not theoretically founded. They are practically only syntactic languages without any semantic settlement. There is a famous sentence from Chomsky that says, if you remember, sorry, it's there. Colorless green ideas sleep furiously. Well, this is a perfect English syntax. It obeys everything in the grammar, but says nothing to us. The semantic is zero, and that is the key point in those in this kind of tools. The production grammars. If we have a production grammar that produces only forms, is not has no relation, no semantic relation to nothing, to motivations, to the world. Well, they only produce forms. Of course, when we have a tool that produces ping, why we use the tool? Well, because it produces ping, and we perhaps we like ping. It's not too difficult to understand how ping could be important, but well, we must really believe that ping is not so important, and there are other things that we can do with those type of tools. Well, the question is not in the syntax. The question is, well, syntax are very important. I don't deny that, but the main importance is the semantics. Well, for example, Professor Wassim related that, yes, they're on semantics and on their projects and on their designs. But the important thing was the relationships, the relations between those concepts. They were semantically orientated. Of course, it's very difficult to create the semantics, all the semantics needed for to create the architecture. Well, we have in a moment. There are currently other attempts to implement synthetic methodologies, combining an explicit declarative semantics and a production machine that are independent of each other. For example, through the declaration of theories in ontologies with first-order logic, which allows complex theories. And then a concrete problem is introduced in the production machine, what is an AI logical inference machine, which queries the ontology and reach the solution or solutions. These models are still under development. It's one of the models that we are working here on. The semantics of architecture is defined into ontologies. The ontology is, well, that kind of relations similar to graphs, but they are more complex because they provide information that we can that are established inside the language that is formal first-order logic. Well, first-order logic can have machines, already developed machines that are able to query the language, and we can obtain results. Well, but this development makes only in classes. Classes means, well, the necessity of creating abstract concepts for the definition of architecture. We have already some 500 or 600 classes. And, well, this is without talking about the individuals of each class. For example, when you are trying to say what are the relations into an hospital, we have the classes, very general classes that are the needs of space for, well, but we must begin a little earlier in the definition of what are the human activities, what are their space necessities, what are the necessities in the movement of the movements of those activities. What are the environmental characteristics that are needed to produce certain activities? What are the materials that can provide that type of environment, and so on, so that when we query this ontology, there is possibility to obtain a response that is a project. But, well, the complexity of defining the semantics of an hospital, it's very, very complicated. You know, this is the real problem, that it's not a syntax, because we have a lot of syntax possible, but, well, the work is seeing exactly how the world works or should work to get those well, to have a model, a mental model, an ontology of that reality. For example, in shape grammars, this is made not in declarative way, but in operative way, and where there are included, well, many rules that can observe already the necessities of the motivations and of the state of the world. We have here we saw presented many of those shape grammars, and they have already a lot of semantics included. Of course, the more semantics create better projects. Well, semantic, not so better, but a more limited number of solutions. Well, and here enters the other phase of the decision. Whatever the model in the synthesis process, the tendency is to produce a wide range of possible solutions. This is where the analysis cycle comes in. These solutions can be analyzed in terms of their quality based on theories that are much better founded than those of the synthesis process, and thus limited the number of projects to the best ones. These analysis methodologies are also suitable for validating the solutions proposed by the traditional manual work of architects. As mentioned above in the learning process, there are already well-established theories of construction. For example, those that are generally the responsibility of engineering, structures, climate, and so on, but also some especially architectural ones, like the space syntax, agent ways, and so on. The big problem is that the theories only say how the world behaves, demonstrating fixed relations between diverse scientific quantities representing the world. It's not very difficult. Yes, it's difficult, but not so difficult as what I call methodologies to create a theory. The theory says that a future state of the world is some function T, a theory, that depends on the current state of the world and the action we do. But our problem is not that problem. We want the best action we can do to obtain a future. And that is called the methodology. It's an inverse function of the function theory. And it is very difficult generally to create an inverse. So we can analyze space with space syntax and see what are the qualities of the space. But it's very difficult to say, well, they give me a space that has these qualities. It's impossible to make that. So what we make is models, and then we analyze the models, and well, you see what is the best, what has the parameters we want to obtain. Well, so it's normally we have these two phases always, and this is true for also what the architect makes by hand. It's not necessary to be an AI machine to do that. Okay. Okay, I'm not now. Well, I'm not now related. Well, what I said before was artificial intelligence of the old school, what I call the deductive artificial intelligence. There are many classifications of schools in artificial intelligence. I prefer to divide those methodologies, not all, but they are mainly deductive, based on logic, based on grammars, on language theory, algebras, decision theory, well, many theories that, well, I say mainly logical. And then there are those based, and that makes expert systems are the operation, the tools that deal with that kind of science. Well, and then there is the second, based on diffuse logic and neural networks, is the fashion AI for the moment. And I'm referring now to that. Well, that is where I place the machine learning. The machine learning in my scheme is something that receive data from sensorial acquisition. Well, it reads what the sensors give the machine learning to crunch, and then produces theoretical models of the world. Well, what does that mean? That creates some relations between data and some concepts. And that is very important. It's the machine learning that I use normally because I want to then work with the machines that I told you before. I want to be linear with deduction, with the logic. Well, but nowadays, there is a better, it's this one, that makes direct assumptions of sensorial acquisition, receive data, and give results for the final project. There is no reasoning understandable for the for any human. Well, what is this? If you see, this is not very different from what well, it's not very important now. It's not very different for what the first scheme we saw that represented the thinking of a human, of a non-human biological. It's complete flat semantics. Well, there are the entities, the concepts that exist are inputs and outputs. And in the middle, in our mind, our reasoning is completely flat. There is no semantics there, nothing. There is a lot of operations that we don't understand. It's a black box, we don't understand those. Well, I think this is, well, I'm measuring my words, but I think it is not the good path to get where we want. Because, well, we don't understand those words. Maybe, and I confess that I accept that, in certain cases, this type of AI can obtain better results than the other AI that we understand. For example, in face recognition or in translation, well, I know that the old attempts to solve the problem are much worse than those of the new AI. Well, that should be discussed, but I don't doubt about that. But I have severe doubts that eliminating all the mental state of the interior of the reasoning, it's a good solution. For example, for us, we lost something that is traceability. We don't know why some decisions are taken. And in logical AI, it's the main topic. We know everything, why every decision was made, because it's a reasoning that is completely formalized. For example, we lose this, but we lost also what I think it's our way of reasoning. Some say that our way of reasoning is a neural network, but I say it's not. Our way of thinking is, well, I think well defined by a logicist. Well, there was many discussions about what was reasoning and what was meaning, for example, meaning, the discussion about the meaning. Well, the best definition of meaning I have is from Rodolphe Carnap. It's a logicist of the end of second half of the 19th century. And he says that it's a mental construction that has two components. The sense is the semantic network, all the relations that one concept, I'm talking about the meaning of one concept, it's the conjunction of sense. It's the complete neural network of that concept inside the language. That means here, and then the referent. Sense and the referent makes meaning. The referent is the relation of some of those concepts with the concepts of under language or at the end with reality. Well, and that is our reasoning, and it's quite, and that reasoning is formalized in science. We have that reason since 200,000 years ago, since the beginning of the Homo sapiens, but now in our epoch we arrive to formalization, scientific formalization, and well, I think it's one of the greatest acquirements of a human being. Well, and that type of AI is not is destroying this and putting everything on the well, I say intuition. Intuition is the contrary of formal. The formal is there somewhere in our. I have nothing about intuition. I think even that intuition, only with intuition, we can produce something that formality can't. The great discoveries, the most great discoveries were not formalized, because if they were formalized, they were discovered before in the formal process. But this is one very small utilization of intuition, because generally intuition is not good. In the 99% of the cases, well, we should have your reasoning. I think I said what I. Okay. Thank you.
Well, I'm sure there are questions. Who wants to go first?
Thank you. I don't think I have a question, but maybe because I want to just poke you now, because it's just such an elaborate thing. And as you were talking about the different kind of components of this kind of, it seems to me more intuition there in the system, but there was the world learning. So there is the world, the current state of the world, right? That plus delta T gives you, let's say, the next state, plus your actions and the methodologies. And there is also the society learning in this too. And I think either now or in the near future, these two, I think in your presentation were more physical manifestations, right? They were representing, let's say, the reality of things, if I understood it correctly. What if these two elements are also part of some sort of diffuse simulation, let's say? What do you think it's going to happen in this system? Because you have them, you have in the middle the machine learning part, let's say, the AI, which feeds from the current state of the world as it is now, let's say. And also it was the learning. You said that we need to also kind of understand the learning in the society, which is the part that was there. At some point, within the realm of agentic AI, so everything is pretty much an AI agent doing different things in the world. And then maybe the world is also fabricated and being completely virtual, let's say, not virtual, but AI generated. What will happen when these two guys talk to the middle guy, which is all AI? What do you think it's going to be the state of the world then? I'm just asking something very I know it's, but I thought about it because you talked about the world and the society, but half of the society now, it's probably Twitter generated by bots, right? Yeah.
Well,
And
it-
half of the world might be in a bit because we have a Sora, the video engine, or a week ago there was an AI generated game engine. So you give it a picture, an image of it, and creates a whole world with interaction and basic physics that is all generated. So the world perception and the world calculation, let's say, is completely fabricated as well. It could be, or it could be, let's say. What do you think?
well, I must say that philosophical, I'm a materialist. So I'm interested in the material world, that which I include the physical and natural world and the social world, and they work outside of our minds, and they work without our minds. They don't need our minds, but we need our minds need the world and society. So although those type of experiments are very useful for research, for example, games and many other things, well, I think architecture can use that as pedagogical or instrumental or something, but it's not the real thing we are trying to address. It's the real life of the populations. It's the real world that exists, and not uh, a model of the world. We have all the interest to produce models of the world that are akin, a fine of the real world.
The mind gets the illusion. It's very easy to trick the mind, believing that it's there.
Yes, but we historically we know that we can intellectually see that those errors of the mind, it's in the psychology, in the first book of psychology, well, we can see that those type of errors of the mind can be easily, for humans, well, some of them not, but most of them, yes, we can retire essences of phenomenon, and we can see that the phenomenon is not the real thing. We are misunderstanding by a simple intellectual, and when we make great, better intellectual well, reasonings, we know that that is not correct. Well, but it's something I would like to. Sometimes in my mail appears, it's because of you. I think it's funny. The creation of artificial words in science. I receive, oh, I don't know, but sometimes emails from those recording societies, ResearchGate, academia, and so, asking if I wrote that paper. Well, I didn't wrote that paper, but I look at it, I see. Yes, the title, it could be something that was made by me. And I think when you make a paper by AI, appears a series of references that are false. I think they are published in academia and so on. And then academia asks, I think in those kind of repositories, there is, it's been created a bubble of artificial things that does not exist in fact. And the fake reference other fake reference. I don't know where this is going to finish. It's only because I think it was funny you referring an artificial.
It's exactly what
I have another kind of sort of thought experiment question, maybe. because I agree very much with you. Let's say what is kind of problematic is that it's a black box. We don't really know. It performs well, but we don't know what's happening in between. That was kind of what you ended up with, is going from, let's say, that AI jumps over all the logic so we don't understand the mechanisms anymore, which is kind of problematic because that means that we have to do trial and error. If we want to intervene, that's because in the end we are architects, we intervene. So let's say if we think the next level of AI, could it be that we can actually ask also what the mechanisms are? Because it could also be that actually, so now it's a black box, but maybe we can unpack the black box with the help of AI. Could you react on that?
No, I think, yes. I present there a position. I position there some machine learning that I think it's very useful. But it's a sort of statistical interpretation of multitude of data. And we have some control on that because we are trying to read big data and obtain concepts. And I think it's very important. If we have no concepts, we have no our human reasoning. We reason with concepts, not with bytes, bits, and so on. It's concepts that we think with. Someone said that machine learning it's the second best tool for solving everything. We could ask, why would we like to use the second best tool? Why not the first best tool? The first best tool is adapted to a problem. We have a best tool for this problem, a best tool for that problem, and the best tool for the other problem. And we have a machine that solves every problem. It's not so nice as the first, but it's very easy to use. And I think we are using that machine of the most weird way, because it's easy and we don't have to think. When we ask the machine to relate data and obtain concepts, I think that is very, very useful. And in that way, I think, yes. For example, one of Tasso's pupils presented on one space syntax conference something like this. Relate the pixels of the black and whites of a space and create the color pixels of a space syntax analysis by AI. Well, after some tests, obtain almost the same results as space syntax using only neural networks. It didn't understood nothing. And well, space syntax we understood. We understand what is space syntax, why that results are important, what they but you can obtain almost the same without understanding anything. Well, he said, "Oh, this is better because it's much quicker than your program." Well, you can say relate pixels with pixels, but if in the work that we produced, we obtained big data from video cameras with computer video. And we made some paths of pedestrians on one street. And we tried to obtain results. It's not other pixels there. To understand, for example, if we can differentiate the pedestrians, if he is a tourist, if he's something is shopping, if someone is straight through, and so on. And and we relate what with the data that we have, velocity, velocity, but we have positions, So time solved, we could get the velocity. We could see the deambulatory path of the, and so if we make this, we can obtain some results. We can obtain the behavior of the Porto pedestrian, the typical, or some variations of some types of pedestrians and so on. Well, this, we are creating reasonings, we are creating concepts. I think this is very, very useful.
Thank you. I just have a comment to add in this discussion because I think the current issue is that nowadays we have machine learning models that are capable of doing extremely fascinating, I mean, they're extremely accurate. But the issue that is that in certain disciplines like medicine, or let's say, even in economics like banks, rely on machine learning models to decide whether you are allowed to get a loan or not. So although the models are working, people now cannot actually implement them because it is not ethical, because they cannot actually resonate. Why did you reject or accept it? So there's an upcoming field that has gained lots and lots of attention during, I guess, last 2 years, XAI, so it's explainable AI, and they're figuring out techniques, which is not about understanding why it resonates, but it gives like counterfactuals, and it tells you like, why didn't you do it? And it tells you that if you have done this differently, I could have accepted to get you the loan. So, but people are really, really paying attention into that. And I think it's the next big thing that's gonna.
It doesn't understand what is happening within a deep neural network kind of. It works on simpler regression type models and what
So, well, there is a, there is a, well, deep learning is used mostly for that kind of artificial intelligence where you obtain concepts, intermediate concepts. So you are not only doing the, well, the connectionist thing through all the steps, but you obtain concepts through the steps. So there is some kind of reasoning. Well, of course, artificial, but this is, well, I think when we use artificial intelligence, we use that that method of research that we call the hypothetic deductive. We make hypotheses, and you are going to test with also with with the connectionist with the connectionist tool.
Okay. I just wanted to kind of, there's a recent book which talks about AI, and it's called AI snake oil or something. And it's about where AI fails actually, and there's a lot of talk about it. And they have given examples specifically wherein they have trained an AI model using X-ray images for COVID patients. And what the neural network actually learned was that it did not learn anything from the X-rays, but it learned more from the age distribution of patients. And if you give a X-ray, it would, the features that it learned was that if you are younger, your probability of having COVID was lesser. And it had nothing to do with what a pulmonologist would see within an X-ray. And that's what I think Franklin was also trying to tell. If let me ask a question. Okay. So sorry. So I was really interested about the work that you're doing in ontologies, specifically for buildings. And there are specific ontologies that are already kind of existing and standardized. So I just wanted to understand more as to what kind of ontologies are you working on? So is it something similar to building topology ontologies or bricks, which are already there standardized, or is it something beyond that?
You'd say more general on classes. needed for, well, the ontologies we are constructing are direct to automation of design. So well, each ontology is proposed. There is no general ontology. So we must adapt that to the machine that will, the logical machine that after must query the ontology. The ontology is declarative. It has nothing. Only we put there information. And then we have to make a machine that asks things to the ontology. Well, there are standard machines, but well, it's very difficult to a standard machine of query of a first order logic to give you an architectural design, an architectural project. It's very difficult. It's impossible, I would say. So we have to create that machine that.
Machine, but I was talking from the other side. There are standard ontologies already there for buildings. So are we kind of extending that in your work, or?
We have to make be very critical about those ontologies because, for example, the ontologies present on the IFCs or PIM and so on. Those are not directed to the work of the architect, mainly to the construction industry or the owners of the buildings and so on. But for example, space is something that is somehow alien of the BIM industry. Space is a basic concept, a basic class in the architectural. So if you want to construct something, we could go there because it's very physical. But architecture is very abstract, not so physical. Although at the end of the day, there is something that is constructed. But it's only at the end of the day because I think the architectural reasoning is very abstract.
Well, thank you for a presentation, first of all. My question is a lot more basic than those ones that came before, and it focuses more on the first part of your presentation. My question is about the impact of all this great research that was presented in the symposium, and obviously all the things that you talked about as the way the AI and all these technologies work. A lot of this work is dependent on advancements of technology that, as we all know, is a monopoly of a handful of countries, and mainly in the so-called West. However, for one part, the West already has its own problems. For example, as we all know, there are complicated social issues which make the socio-economic environment very distrustful of science, and we see that every day. And for example, one of these things is the gentrification, is the example you gave earlier in the other keynote. But the problem for the European countries is not so much about the need for urban expansion as it is, for example, housing access. And there is and in the parts that need urban expansion, there's not, like we do have in the West, a very reasonable number of architects. For example, in Europe, there are lots of architects, I believe, though mostly badly paid. For example, in Portugal, they earn more or less 1,000 euros. However, the demographic expansion is happening mainly outside of Europe. For example, in South Asia, South America, and Africa. As an example, it is projected that the population in Lagos, Nigeria, is going to grow to 50 million people. These expansions represent far larger challenges than those we have in here. I believe it's 5 times the population of Portugal in a city. But for one part, those countries are legitimately distrustful of rich countries and might not be interested in depending on hardly reproducible technology and know-how. On the other hand, the other rich countries ignore that this problem, ignore the problems that these countries are facing, as we've seen in this year's COP. They also ignore the potential voices and solutions they might bring and teach us, the global South. How can we bridge these enormous gaps? And as all these problems become global and the countries interdependent, share and use all this technology and tools and these really important techniques for our collective good. Should that be that with the use of, as you call, the old AI, that is not a black box, that can be understood and examined? Should that be the way, for example, for creating an environment of trust for solving these large and collective problems? Or should we just believe that, for example, something like this AI that no one can understand, even less the countries that have no access to these technologies, should just trust that good is going to happen? Sorry.
It was a problem. It's a problem that transcends architecture by much. But well, you saw in my first part of the presentation, I said that the global South is participating now in the world economy with well, a situation that is not the same as 20 or 30 or any. For example, and we have here people, and it's good that we discuss these problems because they have not our problems. They have other problems. For example, they construct Asia, for example, must construct 30 or 40 times the buildings than in Europe. The problem is not the same. And I would say a little more, where is the center of architecture? Is where it's of course where 30 or 40 or 80% of the buildings are. We know very little about those realities. But these meetings, and we have here, I think in our symposium only we have nobody from Oceania. But from the other continents we have presences and we are discussing. I think this is the way we must. The science is good for everyone. Well, of course, there are owners of science. We saw in the COVID. Well, there were some companies that had the COVID vaccine, and they did, for example, the government of India and South Africa asked to open the copyrights, the rights, and they didn't accept. Of course, we know this, but I would say that if we say that the research and science in the global south is it's not at the same level as, for example, Europe is, I think it's not anymore the case. We have here from Singapore, for example, well, the work of Rudy in its university, it's amazing, and it's not by no means less important than what is made on Chalmers, for example. And well, I think Well, there is not anymore one center. There are many centers, and I think our obligation is to collaborate with each other for the development of everybody, the win-win situation. Of course, it's not easy, but I think we should have this aim.
It's perfect. Antes de sim, vai entrar a Ana Couto. Certo, eu não está aqui. Vou diminuir. Obrigada.
Yes. Yeah, exactly. Okay,
Ana.
Bermejo. Está ao meu lado? Ora bem, né? That was sitting at my side. I didn't know. Okay, nice to meet you. Okay.
Do I go?
Yes, you're the first. So we're gonna start the session 10 with the late presentation from Ana Cocho Bermejo about space syntax as an agent-based system, net logo framework proposal.
Oh, wow. Okay, then. First of all, thank you, Franklin. Thank you, Katarina, for squeezing me in after my unlucky flight of this week. Especially Franklin, that reduced a tiny bit. But the relevant things he had to say, just for me to say my irrelevant ones. So I'm Anna Coach. I'm based in London. I'm from Galicia. I'm based in London. I am an architect and an engineer. 15 years ago, I think it was, I met Dr. Barodis, who was a terrible influence, because then I decided to enroll also in the School of Computing on a second PhD on AI. So now I also teach AI, theory of AI, to architects and engineers in Barcelona. So what I'm presenting here today is kind of super basic pragmatic exercise. So no theoretical debates on semantics, etc. So I'm a little bit embarrassed presenting after Franklin in that sense. So this research was developed in Barcelona, all together with my colleague Dave, who is a computer scientist that is specialized in agent-based systems. So in the past, I was working for neural networks, but kind of 5 or 7 years ago, I swapped and I stepped into agent-based networks and distributed AI, because I'm strongly convinced that we are working towards there. So with the help of Dave, that is obviously not an architect, and highly influenced by Alistair Turner, I was lucky enough to be part of the last cohort that he was able to teach at the Bartlett. I started an exercise following a gap in knowledge that I've been kind of thinking about for the last years. That is the approach of agent-based analysis that is currently implemented in the DevMath software for space syntax. So recapping a little bit of the state of the art before starting the exercise, let's say, it was clear to us that there was not a lot of research of implementations or a more advanced agent-based analysis following Turner's principles, but on a proper agent-based framework. So the whole point of the exercise was trying to understand how to build a basic robust framework, that it was probably an agent-based environment, and from there be able to build up layers of knowledge. So we basically work with the 3 most well-known and recent examples of those types of exercises. One is from Petros and Tassos from 2019.
And basically, we were highly influenced by the kind of implementation might all published last year, that it was also using NetLogo, different focus, but similar aims. So that was that was exactly the beginning of the research. Is really the agent-based analysis that is implemented right now in DevMap, a proper agent-based framework? Because obviously for Dave and I, our answer is not really, because we are missing a couple of features, just speaking about the fundamental ones, that are the ones that are defined an agent-based system regarding proper agent-based simulation. So as we all know, Turner and then Tassos and then Petros developed the whole implementation of the agent analysis based in visibility-based wandering movement, based on Gibson theory, etc., etc. I think we all kind of know about it. It's obviously in a space syntax, when we choose agent-based analysis, we're able to choose different behaviors of the agents, okay? This framework you will see today, I am presenting the results of the simulation with the basic initial, more simple behavior, okay? So starting on the research, as I said, we were going to be focused on the agent analysis developed by DevMap, the version 10, and also the second type of analysis that we're going to be using for the purpose of the mathematical validation will be the through vision one. So taking into account those two type of analysis or diagrams, if you want, that are able to be obtained, we started developing, you know, a kind of in-depth research about the state of the art and how the whole idea of the agent-based implementation analysis was happening from the very beginning. These are some of the initial Alasdair's and Penn drawings and publications. So the main objective was to create a robust agent-based framework with a proper agent-based, let's say, decision-making implementation, and then to be able to build up layers of knowledge, making that behavior even more complex, or keeping on adding different layers of different behaviors for the pedestrians that were being simulated in the near future. So the initial experiment was highly influenced by, as I said, by the publication Might All did last year. So they tried to develop an implementation. In their case, it was also NetLogo, similar agent framework. Their implementation has a kind of a different focus because they were trying to compare the relevance of the angle of vision versus the relevance of the distance of vision. So in an urban environment. But what was really good for us is that they developed a pixel-based approach of how to map the 2D plans of the environment, labeling every layer, every square of the grid with different labels and categories of walkability or accessibility. That was allowing them to make the agents walk around the environment without specifically having a mapping or knowledge about the environment. So also, we built on their conclusions about the relevance of the angle of vision that was, in any case, confirming Turner's proposals on their relevance. So the experiment was developed in 3 phases. The first phase was to mimic on a space syntax, the current version, the well-known exercise of the Tate-Britton. Okay, we chose that example obviously because there is a lot of information about it. It was like the original one in the 90s, but then a lot of publications have been developed within that example. So the first phase was to mimic with existing version the Tate-Britton experiment to be able to compare the results, because also the Tate has been under different levels of refurbishment. So the plan has changed a little bit, and the architect had developed a lot of analysis with space syntax for the new design. The phase 2 of the research was to develop the framework and then to find a way to mathematically validate the framework at a very low basis of implementation. So then on phase 3, we can start adding proper agent-based features that are missing on a space syntax. for the purpose of this exercise, we will see that those are agent-based communication, awareness of other agents, and also attractors and two levels, two scales of goals for the agent. So this is the very well-known validation method and figures that were presented by Turner in the 2000s. But the main problem is that we were not having the data for using a similar method of validation, because obviously we were not having the real data of the 19 people navigating along the tape that they observed. So we jump into the second approach that Turner used several years afterwards when he published about through vision. So when he published about through vision, what he did was to compare the results he was obtaining again for the Tate Britain he tried to demonstrate and find the correlation between the through vision diagram for the Tate Britain and the diagram for agents. He was calling that agents 15.3, that are agents 170 degrees of vision, okay? And working with that correlation, he obtained 0.89. So we were having the data to be able to calculate that correlation with our framework. So that's the validation method that we employed. So we developed our through vision diagram, we develop our ages 15.3 diagram and find the correlation. And theoretically speaking, that was demonstrated our hypothesis and that our framework was working correctly. So we started with implementation in the 3 phases. As I said, the very first phase was to mimic, okay, with the existing version of the map, the Tate Britain experiment. Obviously, it changed a little bit because the reformism works have changed on the top right, that area of the museum, so it's kind of subdivided now. And then we enter into the framework creation. So there was a lot of debate of what type of agent framework to use, because obviously this is a diagram that is showing kind of the ease of developing, the ease of use against the power for modeling. So in the end, we decided to go for a very basic one. We went for NetLogo, open source, very well known, use a lot of different fields, not only architecture or engineering for simulations. And especially we chose NetLogo. One of the reasons was that, you know, there is a GIS implementation that will allow us then to jump into urban environments when the framework was validated. Okay, so once the agent framework was chosen, it was decided that we need to start debating on the agents architectures, because for developing a robust simulation. So it was needed to understand what was going to be the most adequate architecture for the agent. So there was a lot of debate about that because, you know, there was a lot of interest in belief disorientation, architectures, etc. But in the end, what we decided was to implement just a merely reactive one for the validation phase. So once the framework was validated and the hypothesis tested, then it will be possible with the framework we chose to implement more complicated ones to be able to compare the results. So for the initial experiment shown today, it was in the end a reactive architecture, also because we were trying to be as rigorous as possible with Turner's implementation, okay? Because we were trying to mimic his approach. So there was also a lot of debate about the model of pedestrian simulation that was supposed to be implemented. We talked about quite a few of them. But again, we reached the same point in which it makes complete sense for the first phase of validation, just to implement the mimic approach of Turner's one, the one in DevMap 10 right now. So we also pay special attention to this publication. That is a well-known case of implementation, the second one, almost 2 years ago, so both of them quite new. a completely different focus about earthquake simulations. So we took the approach in the end as close as possible to Turner's one. So we discretize our 2D models on grids as a space syntax software does. We consider also analyze some simulation for emergency softwares. We consider Unity power for mapping environments in 3D. But again, in the end, we try to keep the flow of the decision-making of the agent quite straightforward. So the fundamental difference between this one and Turner's is that in the middle of the process of the decision-making, there is communication in between the agents, and there is a high influence of attractors, okay? So we will see with the diagrams of the next phase that the attractors we implemented, as this is a museum, in this case, they are paintings and sculptures around the museum, but the logic will be a similar one just by weighting them in a different ways for other types of attractors. So this is the through vision diagram. This one is the depth map. That one is the one obtained with our framework, okay? For the Tate Britain. Straightforward implementation, as it is well known, how the through vision and visibility paths are calculated. So the very first step that I'm going backwards, I'm going forwards. Okay, so the very first step when we run our implementation, so this is the graphic interface, very simple. You see we have 2D plan, similar way of a space syntax. Space syntax one is more coming from the DWG. We are working more with pixels and images and labeling pixels with walkability values. And then we have several sliders here. So what you see on the screen as red dots are attractors. In this case, they are paints, sculptures, or whatever. At this stage, they are random and weights are random, but that opens the possibility to investigate different behaviors of visitors with different moves, geography, layouts. And you can choose here, you can choose the number of visitors, the number of attractors, the vision angle that you want to be choosing, the vision distance that you want to be using, and you can even choose how many times on the attractors people are staying. Now, if we're visiting La Gioconda, we all suppose that we stay longer that you are visiting a drawing with my Anna, for example, okay? So there are certain things that you can customize, and this value that we see here is the whole calculation of the through vision diagram that is done as soon as you upload the layout that you are studying. At this stage, it's 2D. So we started with the runs. So at the very beginning, as I said, simply mimicking space syntax implementation, no attractors, no communication, no message passing, and no two level of decision making for the goals. And then we run it with exactly the same number of people. They did it with the 19 people they observed at the Tate Britain at the very beginning. So we try just to mimic the situation as much as possible. So main difference we implemented were the first one is that agents in this simulation, and it's a proper agent-based framework, they are aware of other people, so they don't collide, okay? We can implement communications, we can see other agents, and we can coexist at the same location. Okay, that opens possibilities like if a family is missing a museum together, probably the kids are following the parents. Okay, so there are certain type of behaviors not implemented yet, but which basis is here already. Okay, things that we kept the same. Velocity for the agent base is the same one. They don't have access to a map of the environment, so they are first-time visitors, and that was really important for us for trying to be really rigorous with the approach of the space syntax. And at this stage, no swarm-based behaviors and no socioeconomic or other layers implemented, okay? So then, first, they are quite small, but what you see in blue on the screens are the paths of the people visiting the museums. No attractors at this stage, so this is merely base space syntax analysis as the Math 10 version is doing. These are tracking or how many times visitors are passing through the same path. As you can see, correlates quite well with the through vision diagram in some sense. And then the validation mathematically started developing 3 calculations: mean square deviation, mean square error, a Pearson correlation, and then a pixel to pixel deviation. So at this stage, mimicking exactly with our agent-based framework, a space syntax depth 10 map, we obtain a very good result. I don't know if you remember for the previous figures that Turner obtained a 0.89 and we obtain a 0.897n, which kind of we were understanding as a validation of the framework. So being rigorous and implementing exactly in the same way space syntax is doing it, we are obtaining the same results. So that opened the door to the third and final phase of the research at this stage. That was opening the door to proper agent-based features. Message passing, communication, attractors, and also different levels of goals at different scales. So some experiments started. The 2 levels of decision making. Obviously, the first level, the local level, was the next step towards what the agent was going to go. The agent can be influenced by the presence of a painting in the field of view, or by receiving a message of somebody recommending a painting that is passing by, for example. And it's obviously keeping track of the paints and sculptures that are being visited. And also the main goal is to visit a minimum number of the artworks exposed in a reasonable amount of time. I don't remember exactly here, but I think it was like 1 hour and 50 minutes. I don't recall exactly that. So that's how they were basically mixing the current version, okay, of agent-based analysis in our framework with some more advanced features. Results were pretty interesting at this phase because, as you can imagine, paths are starting to change a lot and it started to be more attractors focused. So as you can see here, agents were having Alistair's behavior if no attractors or recommendations were received. And if not, they were working via following visibility lines in the same way. So they were keeping a track. There was always a table of the through vision and all visibility analysis of the plan at the back end in case it was needed. So these are some of the results. As I say, it looks strange because at this stage, paintings are located randomly and the weights of the attractors are random. So there is no Gioconda right now on the plan. But results correlate quite well. This is the other type of diagram we developed with the number of visitors, number of times per patch. Results relate quite well with the, unluckily, one of the last publications Alistair did. That was when he was starting to talk about the animats, the evolved automata that he was theorizing 15 years ago already, about how implementing a visually based neural network with some evolved computing might mimic better how we navigate environments as human beings. So in his work, we can see that the paths start to be more rectilinear And that was happening for us in some ways when we implemented some of the visual attractors. So those are results quite a priori, because this is where we are now. So at this stage, our main goal right now is trying to add more layers of information. And also, with some funding, sometime will happen, maybe, get into 3D mapping of the environment. So we will may consider Unity mapping again. So I think that's it. Thank you.
I'm going to make a slight change because Emmanuel call is in Hong Kong, Singapore, and it's already midnight there. So it's just if we can, it's the second one. So the next presenter, as I said, is Emmanuel call. It's about neurostatic measures of high-rise housing facades. And let's see if he's already still there or gone to sleep. Yep.
Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Hello, Emmanuel.
Can you hear me?
Can you hear us?
Yeah, seems like you can't hear me, is it? Can you hear me? No, you can't hear me. Oh, so let me try again. Can you hear me now? Can you hear me now?
If you can
No?
sound or...
No? Well, my microphone is switched on. How about this? No? Okay, maybe let me... No? Can't hear me. Okay. What about this? Can you hear me now? Can you hear me?
Yes, we are listening you. So you can proceed if you... Hello, Emmanuel, can you hear us?
Yeah, yes, I can hear you now. Great.
Perfect.
Fantastic.
Perfect. So you can proceed to the presentation.
Okay, cool. Yeah, let me share my screen now. Just give me a second. Yes, can you see the screen? Yeah?
Yes, it's in full screen now.
Okay, great. So first of all, thanks for accommodating for this inevitable situation that I can't travel over. I really enjoyed the previous in-person session in 2022 anyway, so it's quite unfortunate. But anyway, so today I'm going to talk about this paper called Neuroaesthetic Measures of High-Rise Housing Facade with my co-author from the Housing Development Board in Singapore, Audrey Shi. So I'll present, yeah. So basically, the paper examined some of the design strategy used in high-rise density public housing facade in Singapore, specifically HDP, and try to propose an approach to understand the effects of visual preference through what we call the visual indices via the facade attributes, which I will elaborate. So we looked at two approaches. One is using rule-based 3D parametric modeling for synthesizing a much more sizable data set. The other one is using deep convolutional neural networks for trying to sort of train an AI model to be able to generate based on the aesthetic values. And then the idea here, so the first one is basically we looked at human with human subjects wearing EEG, and also eye tracking devices. And then looking at first non-photorealistic images from different perspectives, and then second with photorealistic images generated with stable diffusion, mainly with front elevation views. So the contribution of the work is an approach to make use of existing techniques in parametric modeling and deep learning approaches to have some insights on the cognitive and also the visceral preferences of facade design, specifically high density, high rise building, which is often not looked at. So if you're familiar with the HDB Housing Development Board in Singapore, what really happens is that it's basically facade follows floor plan, right? So the floor plan is highly optimized and the facade comes later. And so in that sense, it's sort of literally form follow function. And yet, in reality, 80% of the population stays in this public housing. And so there is this obvious need to address this gap that's been neglected long enough. So here what we do is that we first, as a start, as an introduction here, is that typically when you ask an architect about a facade and his preference, he will give you a rather quite vague we call it the this part. It might be a bit blur on your side. So the physical based way of looking at something, right? So on the one hand, you can do it computationally, saying, okay, the number of vertices in the silhouette, the symmetry, the convexity, the figured ground distribution. But then you can also give like subjective measurements of the overall impression. Like say the architect say the facade is highly tectonic, the articulation of the whatever is highly complex, which is kind of not very useful in a way, in computational sense. And then you also have this kind of emotional based description of a facade. So on the one hand, you could potentially have objective measurements with EEG or eye tracking, for instance, looking at the area of interest of how the gaze pattern look like, but also let's say the frequency band on the EEG, which in this paper will look at the frontal asymmetry, which is a way to understand the preference, whether is it positive or negative, meaning something that you're inclined to like or find disgust, let's say. So, and then also lastly, the subjective measurements, which is sort of a survey, which is quite standard. People asking you, and then you saying, I like it, I dislike it, and so on and so forth. So we try to do this. So at the beginning of the methodology, we have this looking at existing facade HDB projects, and then analyze and try to formulate a facade taxonomy in order to then parameterize them and begin to represent them in the same dimension, number of dimensions. So we look at all 8 projects, but in fact, so this is Singapore, very small. And those are the distribution of the HDBs in Singapore. And so we started off with looking at just, those that won the HDB Design Awards, which is an annual thing. So their distribution might be small, these are the red ones. So initially looking at 16 of them, just to have a clearer understanding, a better understanding of the facade, the nature of these high-rise, high-density facade in Singapore specifically. So start off with 16, and I mean these are the 3D models of the respective facade buildings HDB. So there are actually 16 of them that we started off, but eventually we zoomed honed into just 8 of them, which we find relatively more diverse in their facade articulation. And so you can look at the research methodology, the attributes. So we start off with the attributes. So the attributes essentially, sorry, it seems a bit blur here, but in any case, I'll just go through. So the top represent the different attributes. For instance, the first one represents the volume of the building. That includes projection gradient length from the key main planes, and then the volume of the convex. So this is convex hull. Actually, you can read from here also, in fact. And then you have the figure ground, and then you have the number of vertices within the silhouette, and then you look at the area of the openings, meaning windows and openings. Look at the facade, meaning like the facade, the sun shading fins and all that. You look at the length of the horizontal and vertical elements, and then we use that as a way to then derive the indices. So starting off with attributes. So just to quickly clarify what I've just talked about. So for instance, this project, yeah, this image is much clearer. So for 8 of them, we did this, right? Silhouette, window openings, facade, horizontal, vertical, volumetric. And then for this other building, which is this, we did something similar, looking at the same attributes. For this Sky Park in Dawson as well, we look at again same set of attributes. And so sometimes when the buildings are connected with a bridge or sky terrace, we consider it as a single volume, like in this case. Well, a corridor in this case, actually, not a sky terrace. And one is something similar. But you get the idea. I mean, in some cases, the volume is a lot more pronounced, like the stepped massing. Yeah, sometimes more. But so here's the idea: is that once you could measure this attribute, you could then begin to compute the indices. So here is a tabulation of 8 of them. And so in order to get, let's say, the indices would be, let's say we get the, let's say in this case, one of them is about the ratio of the height and length. So you just take the height, divided by the length and so on and so forth. So we derive these indices from the 10 attributes. And then we begin to compare, in this case, just showing 8 of them, how they differ, numerically speaking. And then, yeah, this image is a bit blur, but then begin to use the spider chart to visualize almost as if this is a sort of signature of the facade in order to see if one facade is more similar than the other one in a sort of more explicit way. And then second is begin to score them accordingly. So here, for instance, we begin to generate, having understood the kind of facade that we're dealing with, we begin to construct a parametric model that increases in complexity and with increasing facade element. For instance, so these are some examples. The yellow highlighted ones are the options that we decided to include to kind of illustrate the differences. So for instance, the one at the bottom, apologize for the blurry image, is where it's highly complex facade and with lots of facade elements. So we did, so here we plot again this synthetic data set, being understood real from the real data set. And then we begin to have an experiment set up. There are 2 experiments being done, of which only experiment 1 was completed. So we look at different views. So basically sample points. Yeah, and then we begin to extract the images from different perspectives and test it with our human subjects. So this is how they look like, the different views. And then so the first experiment used the eye tracker and the EEG records. And basically we have the user looking at it with so 10 minutes introduction. I think it's the next slide. Yeah, here. Okay. And then the second experiment, and then we also do a survey to see if they like it or dislike it, just to see if there's any correlations. experiment to train the deep neural network model to predict the indices directly with the synthetic data set, and then and then score it, right? So this is the sort of setup. So you've got the eye tracking, and then you have the EEG. So 10 minutes. So one session is about 30 minutes. Introduction, setup, 50 minutes, 98 images, 5 seconds per image. One transition, which is basically a gray out, just so that they sort of refresh their, their visual mental image, and then ask them to choose the top 3 facade. And I mean, this sample size, unfortunately, is very tiny because it's just initial work that we try to work on. So some of the results there are, I mean, the thumbs up represent those that they have chosen. So, and then, the ranking. All right, so this is showing the ranking. The one with architecture training in the first column, and then the human subject without architecture training on the right column. And we also see that some qualitative insights in terms of preference. There is the tendency for much focus area of interest in when the volume is more articulated, in this case, stepped facade. There's a bit of a problem in the experiment initially because of the asynchronicity of the EEG and the eye tracking, but this kind of been solved, but which was not included in the original paper submission. The experiment to actually takes in all these indices as an input, and then we algorithmically generate facade input. So basically a square of 4-story, and then we train a model, and then we obviously have the ground truth because it's parametrically generated with synthetic set. We could then train a model given the selected subsets of facade. And so this is sorry, a bit tiny. This is again the predicted, and the prediction is reasonable. But then we move on further because to have people looking at this highly abstract image. So we then use stable diffusion. So first you have the parametrically generated composition with the semantic facade input, and then second row is the photorealistic facade rendered with stable diffusion. Third column is the gaze pattern upon that square image, and then on the right, the vertical sliders are the frontal asymmetry values from the EEG. So we did this experiment, but we didn't complete it. So this is sort of future work where you have the human aesthetic scores and the targeted indices, meaning you may choose 5 out of the 10, and then you train the model. So that this is something that we are working on, and more lately is that we are beginning to test the in 3D. So what I've shown you just now, those are just images of the facade or the meshing as 2D, but this is in 3D. So now we are actually looking at the saliency distribution in the point cloud of the volumetric. So these are architecture that we have done. Prediction is quite bad. I mean, not amazing, but this in progress. As I said, this is future work. So we're starting to create and train a model that could take in XYZ, takes in also the geometric information of actual 3D models. Yeah, so this is how I have things.
Let's proceed to the third presentation. Olá, Tico Nova. I think I spelled right. Kind of. Sorry. It's about computation proportion analysis of inner residential spaces in 17th century Bastion Castle. Can you spell your correct accent name?
Ольга Тихонова.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. Good afternoon. Thank you so much for coming today to see my presentation. It's an honor to be here. And it will be quite different from another presentations because it's not about future and present, but about past. And it's how we can use these formal methods that you are developing to explain and to understand our past. So a little bit about background, maybe what is it, the Bastion Castle, and what I'm studying. Here you can see one of the examples. It's a Bastion Castle in Ukraine, in Підгірці. It's my favorite. And that one can be maybe more familiar to you because it's a Zbaraj Bastion Castle also in Ukraine, but it was described in 17th century treatise that is quite famous of Vincenzo Scamozzi. And what is it? It's a special structure that was developed and created by two components that were by itself developing separately. It's a military development and residential development that created one form in Renaissance time. And when we talk about it, because in 17th centuries, those two military architecture and civil architecture, they separated and they had different paths and they have different treatises. But some scholars still were working on creating some treatises and explaining that something can be still some structure can exist and coexist when it's military combined with the civil architecture. And what is Bastion Castle? It's a palace, actually, and it is connected to the fortifications. And fortifications, it's a wall, it's a defensive wall. And the most famous example that was built in Italy, it's a Villa Caprarola that was started by Balthasar Peruzzi and finished by Vignola. And it's the base that looks like a fort. And then Vignola tried to make this Renaissance palace that is should be according to the rules of Renaissance. And then there was a Serlio who also created the treatise, but a bit a different structure when the palace is just inside of these walls, but it's separated from it. And there were also other scholars like Cerceau who were experimenting on the types, on the structure, on the combination. And Perret, also French architect, who also tried to combine the palace and the fortifications. And here you can see the example from Ukraine, the first one that I showed you. It's a Підгірці Bastion Castle that is very similar to the French architect Perret. And as you can see, both have this special structure when you have the palace and then the fortifications in front of it. And my question was, can the castle be as good as a palace? At least the Renaissance castle, can it be as good? And I tried to answer it from different perspectives. I tried pedestrian circulation, natural lighting analysis, natural ventilation, orientation, and the last one was proportions. And the proportions will be explained here because the previous ones were explained in the previous formal methods of architecture conference. So you can read more about that in the proceedings. And the previous ones, it was included the Hiller and Hansen graph theory, planning diagram of Patrick Volcker, and Gerrit Schminek and Johannes Niemeyer analysis of combination or relation of these bastion castles to the space, to the landscape, and also their location and organization, the composition. So it was quite comprehensive approach to analysis. And one of them, I use space patterns from George Sutter at Technical University of Vienna. And how it was just I modeled the Bastion Castle and placed it into his web application. And I got these different kinds of analysis that you can see, like you can choose if it's pedestrian circulation, natural lighting. And I modeled several different castles, and the answer at that time was the same to all of them, that even in Renaissance period, like even the castle, it can be so good as a palace. and it can be actually very good even for current situation because it has very good lighting, very good natural ventilation. And about pedestrian circulation, it was like that it was good for that time because in that time there was the idea of enfilade planning when you can go through the all spaces and to end up with a window and have this relation with the space, like to go through the places and still be with relation with nature. And you can see that it exists in this Pedhir Sebastian Castle because you go through the doors and you see the relation with nature. And then I saw this treatise, that is Polish treatise, and here I will explain 6 different cases. 3 are from Ukraine and 3 from Poland, but I always will be referring to Polish to them as a Polish cases because at that time the territory of Ukraine was the part of Polish territory. So all the rules applies the same. And the Polish treatise says it was the first treatise that was written in Polish and used by architects and engineers in Poland. Although there is the name of the creator is unknown, it was popular and it says that when you design a palace or a castle, you need to follow the rules, the proportional rules, the rules that were firstly established by Vitruvius and then picked up by Palladio and other architects. So you should follow those rules. But at the same time, this book says, but when you apply the Palladio rule, you still can make it some changes because you can do it as you see it fit, as you see it beautiful. And you can adapt it because we are actually in Poland, we are not in Italy, so just feel free to do it your way. And then when I read this treatise, I thought, okay, so did they actually follow these rules? Did they follow Palladio rules or did they make something else? What is actually the percentage that they follow, if they actually follow? And my methodology, firstly, I was quite direct. So I took the Pedhir Sebastian Castle plan. I checked what were the proportions in Renaissance. I had them on a paper, and I just took the ruler and the compass and tried to find which proportion can fit to this space. And I will not say that it's a wrong way to do, but it's for sure the long way to do. And if you want to analyze many spaces and many cases, it's quite complicated and very time consuming. So I saw the more better approach, let's say it, that one of the colleagues was analyzing the palace in Portugal, and the idea was to find if the proportions were from Sebastiano Serlio. But he was also doing it just one case, and he was also trying to fit these proportions into these spaces almost manually, but he used the ratio, decimal value of the ratio. So he was just measuring the ratio of the room and then comparing it with the ratio that was the ratio of proportions, of known proportions. And he used a formula that is quite a standard formula to find the error. And he found that actually this palace uses the proportions of Serlio. And then I thought, okay, I have already modeled those cases and I can just try to automate it with Grasshopper. So I used Grasshopper and Rhino and I loaded the data. I defined the proportions that are theoretical proportions, and I calculated proportions using Python component, and I wrote a script. And this idea, I use the same formula to find the closest proportion and visualize the results. And I made it for 6 cases that I have already modeled, but it can be implemented to any cases. You just put the building there and you have the results. For the castle in Brody, the first one that from Ukraine, I found out that the most popular proportions, ratios is 8:7 and 1:1, and some others that are still in the theoretical treatises. For the Pirhir Sebastian Castle, the same. I have the error that was visualized and the most popular proportions that were found there. So you can see from the graphs that 2:1 was the most popular, and it's actually the most popular for Renaissance treatises proportions. This one was quite, let's say, it didn't fit exactly to this idea, let's say, but there are some proportions that are still some spaces that are according to these proportions. This one, it was not quite, it's like it was before the castle, the medieval castle, and then it was converted to the Renaissance castle. And that's why many spaces are still following the rule, but many of them are not. And we have this proportion there. And here is a Lanchet Castle in Poland, and we have those proportions there. And here is Lodechowice in Poland also, and it follows quite well the rules, and we have these proportions. And here is the all proportions combined together that I found in all those cases. And you can see still the most popular proportion is 9:8, 1:1, and 2:1. And it's actually the most popular proportions in all Renaissance treatises. And although 9:8 is not so written as a most popular, but when I studied also the proportions of spaces of Palladio, it was found there in many cases. And it's very similar to 1:1. So it also could be the error or not fitting exactly how they wanted to fit when they were constructing it. So I think like it can be like that. So that's all. Thank you so much for your attention.
Okay, let's proceed to the fourth presentation. George Mitrovic with the team exploring variability within the 3D shape collections of facade panels of modernist multifamily buildings in the New Belgrade's methodological framework.
Okay. Hello, everyone. My name is George Mitrovic, and on behalf of my team, I will present you our research titled Exploring Variability Within 3D Shape Collections of Facade Panels of Modernist Multifamily Buildings in New Belgrade, a methodological framework. This research was performed at our institution, University of Belgrade Faculty of Architecture. By the way, I'm PhD student and teaching assistant on Department of Architecture at that institution. And as well, this research was performed within the research unit Lab 6 or Laboratory for Research, Valorization, Conservation and Preservation of Cultural Heritage. Here we can see research structure. So let's start from the early beginning. Now I will briefly introduce you in our research or study area. New Belgrade. Most of the modernist multifamily buildings in New Belgrade are over a half century old. Therefore, the issue of renovation, preservation, and maintenance of them, particularly of their facade envelope, is more acute than ever, since the concrete as material predominantly was used in building them. We proposed, we hypothesized that having certain 3D shape collections of corresponding facade panels can significantly aid those processes. And as we can see here, this is city of Belgrade, and this is city part on a left bank of Sava River, which is called New Belgrade. Actually, this city part isn't new. It was built in a second part of 50th century. And as we can see also, this central zone marked is a zone that that became whose 9 consisting blocks became cultural gods within broader spatial cultural historical entity in 2021. And also New Belgrade and its brutalism and concrete utopia is being actualizing in recent years, particularly with this as a part of an exhibition in Museum of Modern Art in New York. As we can see, there is a cover page of a book whose editor is Vladimir Kulic. And as I wanted to say that New Belgrade was constructed on a tabula rasa situation from scratch, actually, in approximately 50 years. With respect to the ideological construct of a new beginning, and reflecting the modernism as a movement, and adopting it and brutalism, and adopting it to the local post-socialist context of former Yugoslavia. And modernist multifamily buildings are renowned for their repetitive series of facade panels. Well, despite this apparent uniformity, we think we hypothesize that significant variability in their appearance can be observed. However, or nevertheless, as large digital repositories continuously grow, encoding the intercluster dissimilarity becomes important. Therefore, this study aims to establish a methodological framework for exploring the variability within a selected 3D shape collection of facade panels. As we can see here, there are some representations of those repositories of 3D shape collections, and as well shape segmentation is important part, but in a subsequent phase. I will not talk a lot about morphospace, because on the first day of conference, Vinicius explained that in more details. I just will say that the usage of morphospace, whose n-dimensional character depends on the number of traits being considered, is foreseen herein to systematically map and analyze varying of the panel morphology. And we hypothesized that the number of non-overlapped morphospace points, or exactly positions of that points will correspond to the number of panels whose morphology was parametrically analyzed. And here, every point in the morphospace actually represents one phenotype of organism species. In this case of shell. When we talk about materials and methods, firstly, we performed 3D shape collection selecting. The criterion for shrinking the study area to the central zone I aforementioned at the beginning referred to that whether some of the modernist heritage buildings simultaneously represent the cultural heritage, and the housing, since the housing became the key content of a new Belgrade in the phase of concept materialization, the residential buildings were chosen over other exclusively. More precisely, 3 of 9 consisting blocks of the central zone 26, 25, and 24 from top to bottom were excluded from owing to the fact that the facade materialization of those buildings is not of reinforced concrete predominantly, contrary to the remaining 6 blocks of whose buildings that is a common feature. In the next iteration, block 30 with own multifamily residential buildings imposed itself superiorly in relation to others, since that block abounds with the widest spectrum of different typologies of multifamily buildings. We can see 3 typologies mapped in this situation. And I can say now that only meander building type from those 3 building types was chosen, since its panels are of the most complex geometry among those considered. Now I will talk about 3D shape collection obtaining. Field work methods were encompassing in situ observation, recording, photographing, and noting an as-is panel appearance. To ensure as-is panel appearance to be considerable from subject-related point of view, the descriptive interpretation methods, namely 3D modeling, was implemented, despite the fact that those panels could be digitized by applying photogrammetry, 3D scanning, or something like that. In the stage of parameters defining, to define such a space herein, we identify that each axis should correspond to a different parameter from the set of inherited ones. Each point within thereby defined space would correspond to a particular combination of parameters, and thus to a specific panel shape or panel shape type, as we will see in a further part of presentation. A somewhat smaller number of parameters inherited from our previous research can be declared adequate from the research objective point of view, because that objective refers to establishing methodological framework exclusively. In our previous subject-related research, as I said, key morphological characteristics in terms of varying was identified by observing what is changing from panel to panel shape, or more precisely from group of panel or of all mutually almost identical panel shapes to another such group. But in the scope of this research, due to those parameters are slightly tuned to better fit the subject-related exploring exploring variability. and both panel width and panel length parameter were merged into one parameter called length to width ratio, or LW ratio, and panel rib spacing was inherited but transposed into a number of ribs which better fit the exploring targeted exploring, and position of air conditioning conduit hole was inherited from but split it into two mutually independent ones, namely hole U coordinate and hole I don't know, V coordinate. UV mapping coordinate, it is normalized from 0 to 1. And the remaining two parameters called presence of air conditioning conduit hole, namely presence of specific details, were renamed respectively into conduit hole possession, namely specific details possession. And I can now emphasize that not all of the panels, firstly, not all of the buildings within meander building type was taken into account, but only one, because they are mutually very similar and regarding the research objective point of view, and not all the panels of that particular building were taken into account. But the minimal number of diverse panels whose parameter values combinations result in maximal number of positions or morphospace points. I will now go back. Here, the parameter, those two parameters are present more clearly, where coordinate of a conduit hole is normalized from 0, 0 to 1, 1. There are equations performed to get the values of parameters defined. And I said that. And in such a way, typical panel shapes regarding that particular building was identified. And every position of a point herein should represent exactly one corresponding panel shape type. We now can see that from all the panels, only those 21 panel are identified as shape types of facade panels, and only 7 of them contain a hole for an air conditioning conduit, whereas 5 shape types, the same 3 of those 7, are characterized by specific details. Specific details in terms of presence of some mass cutouts or something like that. Now, the particular problem was how to represent that morphospace as a multidimensional space, how to coordinate those parameter values. And accordingly, respecting the 6 parameters defined, 6 axes were established in order to create spatial morphospace coordinate system. And first octant from Cartesian coordinate system was inherited by adding additional 3 ones as spatial diagonals of nearing octants. Parameters values were additioning by applying head-to-tail method in domain of vectors assuming. And as we can see, regardless of the order on way on which those vectors were assumed, because we can get the same resultants in a different ways. Here, only two are presented. And now we can see the results. There is a morphospace with those 6 axes established, and we can see now 21 points that occupy the spatial morphospace. And based on that, we can now discuss the results. First of all, we can see this group of closest points that represent the shapes, types of panel shapes that don't have or that are not characterized by the presence of conduit holes, air conditioning conduit holes, or specific details in terms of mask cutouts. And we can identify, this is actually a clustering now. We can identify those 5 points in a morphospace, actually 5 types of panel shapes that represent panels that are characterized by the presence of specific details. And these 7 points represent types of panel shapes that are characterized by the presence of air conditioning conduit hole, and this region where those two regions are overlapped actually represents only 3 types of panel shapes that share both the characteristics regarding presence of specific details or air conditioning conduit hole. Another important thing is to say that this approach, as every approach has limits, one should note that the same morphospace point, namely position of a such point, can be obtained by additioning mutually different combinations of vector magnitudes. But in such a case, you need a specific combination of vector quantities where shortenings of some, as we see here, will be compensated by lengthenings of the remaining ones. But I can say this is actually theoretical by Murphy. This would happen in our case, in particular case of panel shapes and block 13 New Belgrade, the particular 3D shape collection. It does not make the difference. When it comes to conclusions, comparing different shapes to each other and relating their traits to functional roles, morphological relationships could be studied to identify potential diversity-wise patterns, the way different shapes, as we saw, occupy the morphospace, as well as the spread of points, could be analyzed. And clustering algorithms might identify distinct groups of mutually almost identical facade panels. The results shown highlight the subtle yet impactful differences in the panel's appearance that contribute to the architectural identity of the buildings they belong to, as we hypothesized at the early beginning of the research. And when it comes to research benefits regarding shape synthesis, shape interpolation, namely blending between two or more existing shapes to create new intermediate ones, becomes applicable in this particular context as well, as we can see here from various authors. We can interpolate our shape, for example, for instance, from less dangerous to more dangerous, etc., etc., according to the parameters we define. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much. Let's go to the final presentation, the fifth one, by Heather Liegler. Okay, at least the last one, I could hit the accents. It's about cans to house, from formal analysis to animated synthesis. Whenever you're ready. Just a brief note, Emmanuel just texted us and said that it's too late for him to stay awake. So if there is any questions, he asked if you can send him by mail or text, and he will try to answer as soon as he can. Okay, thank you. Let's proceed.
Okay,
Thank you.
great. Thank you. Hi, everyone. Good afternoon, good evening, whatever time it is at this point. I'm Heather Liegler. I'm an assistant professor and foundations coordinator at Florida Atlantic University in Florida, which we're in Fort Lauderdale, which is South Florida, just north of Miami. And this project, what I'm going to present today, Khan's Two Houses from Formal Analysis to Animated Synthesis, is definitely a work in progress, but I've been excited to have the opportunity to explore it and think about it through this symposium. So in 1955, Louis Kahn had this essay in Perspecta called Order and Form. And Perspecta is the Yale Journal of Architecture, and this was published right after the Yale University Art Gallery was completed in '53. And the whole thing is kind of a series of vignettes of different, including this kind of poetry, kind of stream of consciousness text by Kahn, but exploring this question of order and systems and design, and especially thinking about the Yale Art Gallery as this kind of pivotal project, which was developed in Kahn's office when Ann Ting was also in the office. And they were collaborating on this and really thinking about how geometry could facilitate different systems and buildings. And of course, this, the gallery is famous for the ceiling and the way the tetrahedral ceiling conceals the ductwork. And a lot of this the projects in this article focus on that idea. What Kahn was talking about at the time was the intestines of the building and how to conceal them within the form. So there's several pages in the article kind of decomposing how the ventilation system, the electrical system are all layered into the ceiling component itself. My project takes on the next part of the article, which is just this small kind of 2-page spread about these two houses that Kahn designed in the 1950s that were never built. They were both designed for clients in Pennsylvania, the DeVore House and the Adler House. And he says, you know, each house is a cluster of square areas, 26 foot on a side. They grow out of the same order. The designs are different. So this is a moment when Kahn was really pursuing this idea of some sort of language and defining his own language in architecture. And again, within the house itself, he writes about, you know, kind of asking this question like he did about the brick. What does the brick want to be? An arch? What does the house want to be? Rooms? You know, instead of thinking about the whole house as a composition, he wanted to think about these modules. So, and actually ask about the unit of the room itself and how they relate one to another. He was also interested in the fact that his clients were asking for air-conditioned houses. So how could he conceal the same way that he did in the art gallery? How could he conceal all these guts that were becoming part of the architectural problem? So in these two houses, they both employ this same module, but they employ different, two key differences, I would say. One is the material structural system, and one is what I'm calling the unifying element. So in the DeVore house, they're 18-inch square brick piers. That there's 6 to each unit of the house. And within that, that allows for a kind of thickened cavity of the main walls where this ductwork and electrical systems and all that go. And then it's this long wall that provides this kind of datum across the composition and holds it together. In the Adler house, it's these 3'6" stone piers at the corners. And because of the kind of shifting nature of the geometry, those aggregate to form these rectangular and L shapes that become this kind of thickened poche where Kahn could conceal, you know, all these different things he was trying to stuff into the building. And the unifying element in this case are these square patios that create this kind of grid-like exterior space that unifies the shifting modules. One thing I'll talk about, well, I'll talk about that in a minute. So these houses were in this article by Kahn, but they were also revisited by Peter Eisenman in 10 canonical buildings in 2008. And within that, Eisenman was interested in how these houses define what he calls a canonical moment in Kahn's work between a kind of initial, and again, it goes back to my interest in them in Kahn's search for a language. So this kind of moment between Kahn's previous work, which was a bit more conservative, and then the work that he started to develop after this. Eisenman also described these in a chapter where he talked about diachronic space and this kind of difference in relationship to time in these buildings. And of course, within his own diagrams, he started to use his process of close reading and formal analysis in the diagram to try to capture Eisenman's interpretation of a grid in motion and how these houses kind of capture this frozen moment in time within Kahn's design process. I'm interested in revisiting these two houses in terms of the things that haven't been analyzed about them, in particular, how they work as a house, and also the way that Kahn was talking about them in terms of musicality and composition and how designs encourage more designs. And so a couple things that I'll point out about the houses. So I'm also interested in what they share. So there's a lot of commonalities between them rather than differences. So I already talked about, you know, the kind of differences in the structure and the unifying element, but also there's 3 different ways the spaces are used for houses. So, or for the functions of a house. They're either complete volumes, which this is the living room, which has a fireplace in both houses, or they're patios or carports that are open. They're subdivided in 2 ways. So one is kind of a split wall down the middle, and that's used for bedrooms and bathrooms and also for kitchen and bedroom. And then there's this kind of nested subdivision of a volume inside a volume. And that's always the entry in both houses where you come into the space and would have a half bath closet, a smaller foyer, perhaps a breakfast area, and that kind of space. So the main question that I'm always interested in probably is how can, not always about Kahn, but how can this systematic design exploration in the houses be revisited computationally to speculate on the relationships between analysis and synthesis in contemporary practice and pedagogy? And more recently, I've really been interested in this question of precedent, and especially given the buzzwords thinking about generative AI. So this is Mario Carpo writing in Log last year in this article, Formal Analysis, Generative AI, and the Eternal Return of Precedents. And he says, AI today obliges us to deal with precedent, but we no longer know how to do that. As imitation and style have been absent from most critical discourse in the visual arts for the past 2 generations, we are all, but particularly in Eurocentric modernist West, a bit out of practice and in need of retraining. We need to re-engage with imitation and style in critical, interpretive, and creative terms. And in my work and kind of my obsessions, I'm interested in how the shape grammar formalism provides a way to investigate that. This is my kind of favorite publication from that discourse, which is George Steiny and James Gipp's book from 1978, Algorithmic Aesthetics, Computer Models for Criticism, Design, and the Arts. And in that book, they propose this equivalence between analysis and synthesis that I find quite fascinating in terms of those types of algorithms. And of course, Steiny continued to develop that in a lot of his work and program. And this is, it was already brought up yesterday, I think, in one of the presentations about kindergarten grammars, that particular grammar. And this is what Steiny proposes in that, which is a constructive program for design and for setting up grammars. So starting with a vocabulary, building spatial relationships, defining shape rules, using initial shapes, and then defining grammars that could generate a language. And with my students, I always add this line, what you see in red, of kind of my interpretation of how that divides into these modes of analysis and synthesis. Rules can be really hard to come up with, to write, to define a language. But I find that, you know, if we stress analysis and decomposition first, it becomes much more straightforward. So in these two houses, that's exactly what I did, is try to decompose them in terms of how all the different spatial relationships between these modules. So a single module, pairs of aligned modules, shifting modules, and pairs with gaps between them, and then the unifying wall. And in the Adler house, there's a similar kind of rhythm: the single module, the pair line, the shifting one, the shifting ones with gaps, and then the patios around them. So when you compare all of these kind of parts and their relations, they start to, again, share far more similarities than differences in terms of the two houses, and provide this kind of underlying foundation for thinking about developing a generative system in terms of the houses themselves. And of course, in this work, I'm building on this kind of lineage of projects that have looked at architecture in terms of shape grammars, from the Palladian grammar to the language of the prairie, to Duarte's Caesar grammar. And then I humbly include the grammar from my dissertation at the end of this, which is on John Portman's Intellecti One house in Atlanta, which I'll show you a little bit more about that. So I did my dissertation at Georgia Tech. And so this is, all of these were computed with an interpreter we developed while I was a PhD student there, called Shape Machine. And it's a plugin for Rhino that allows you to implement shape rules by drawing geometry directly. So no backend, all on the live canvas of the Rhino space. And this allowed me to generate, you know, far more designs out of the house, which is just one house that Portman said all his ideas were embedded in, and that he related to all of his projects. So even his larger scale hotels, he related to the house. So I was able to kind of generate all these different variations using the software. So I've gone back, I keep revisiting that methodology with other languages to understand and kind of question its potential applications. So for example, this is a screenshot of everything I prepared for this paper. So it's just one, you know, kind of place that I'm doing all of this generation. There's a couple different modes in the software. This is more of the developer mode. So rules, what you see in green, hopefully you can see it okay, is a kind of rule template. I'll zoom in and you'll see it more in a second, but you can just copy the rule template over and over. And then there's a toolbar where you apply the rules. But I can basically select a rule and apply it and keep copying down to generate the variations. There's also a compiler mode once you're done kind of developing your rules, so that you can automate the production of designs instead of interacting in this way. But I prefer this mode for, you know, initial investigations for sure. So for this kind of prototypical grammar I've been working on, based on the houses, there's 3 phases of rules. The first are just dealing with those initial modules and their relationships one to another, and then generating the material system at the end. So we can see here kind of a generation of 2 different variations, one for each material system here, by applying rules to add the modules. And of course, this allows me to kind of engage Khan's idea, and instead of just getting 2 houses, to very quickly have more like 16 to look at the possibilities of the design. And then in a second series of rules, I start to build on the functionality. So where the living room goes, where the bedrooms goes, where that foyer goes. And those work kind of from the outside in, and use those red arrows that are kind of markers in the design to make sure nothing gets selected multiple times, and to kind of control how everything happens. And that allows me to develop these more specific schemes that are somewhat zoned for the functions of the house. And then there's a final kind of set of rules that I don't actually have in the paper yet, but that allow those kind of initial subdivisions to basically be replaced with walls, counters, things representing or spatial articulation representing the foyer, the half bath, the wall, the patios to complete this kind of generation of design variations. And what I think is interesting about this is, you know, in Eisenman's formal analysis, he talks about the houses and their relationship to Kahn's bigger projects. So how they affected his design of like the Richards Medical facility at UPenn, for example. That's the main kind of precedent he discusses. But I think by looking at them this way, we can make a kind of broader understanding of Kahn's house designs. So this is the Fisher House and this is the Finger House, which were both designed after these houses. And by starting to look in terms of modules and manipulations and how the spaces and subdivisions work, we could see this as a kind of transformation that involves overlapping modules and rotation. This is again the kind of repetition, but defining a courtyard and providing a sense of public space or like a communal outdoor space within the house itself. And so this is something I mentioned at the beginning of the talk. I mean, part of why I have been trying to, or inspired when I'm finding examples that seem powerful pedagogically is because I am in this new role as a foundations coordinator at FAU. And we are a program that is a professional architecture program. But in fourth year, we're requiring all students to do this creative AI studio where they do self-organizing maps and large language models. And that's led by Daniel Bolajan. And so in part of my role coming into the program was to figure out how we introduce students in first, second, and third year to rule-based design. So I want to show just a little bit of how I think this relates to not just a kind of theoretical or historical exploration, but possibilities for thinking about education and how that could potentially have some relevance, not only for architectural education, but potentially for educating and interacting with practitioners as well. So in this so I teach 3 classes in a row. The first one is a theory course and 2 studios follow after that. And they're all focused on kind of analog computation. So trying to introduce students to analysis and synthesis as a kind of workflow. And in this first theory course, we focus on Paul Rudolph's early houses from the 1950s. These are all Florida houses. So he practiced there before he was the dean at Yale and, you know, before he had a much more grand kind of career. And a lot of them are very humble, smart houses, smart materially, smart thinking about hurricanes and hurricane protection and all sorts of things. And so the students are sometimes kind of thinking like, why are we just looking at this box with shutters or whatever? But they're quite nice buildings. And what the students do is they go through this process of decomposing them in this mode. And we use Rudolph's kind of guiding principles that he defined as space, structure, site, function, and spirit as a way to kind of break down and look at the kind of relationships inherent to each house. And then what the students do is they make fakes. So none of these are the real originals by Rudolph. These are all fake plans that the students make by hand. They don't use the software that I showed. They use a process of collage and then interpreting their collage to define rules to modify the houses. So for example, this is a student's project where she was looking at the Walker Guest House, critiquing it in terms of contemporary living. What would she want to modify? What would she want to change? Defining some simple manipulation rules to start to make those changes. So we talk about it like a surgery, kind of surgical manipulation of the house itself, of the precedent. And then creating these 4 variations based on repeating that logic over and over. This is work second year, first semester. So I always say their plans are better from this mode than what they actually do in studio. So we need to adopt this more. And I'm trying to adopt it in studio as well as we continue the program. So to conclude, I mean, I don't know, this is a work in progress. I'm interested for your feedback or thoughts on it. But I'm fascinated by this idea of analysis and synthesis and how we can play with that and engage it computationally, but also pedagogically. And I think potentially it also provides an interesting way to think about generating custom data sets that could be quite fascinating as well. So I can leave it at that, as I'm the fifth presenter in the session. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Let's start with the round of questions. Who has a question to raise and to present to some? Please.
Yeah, I have a question for Heather, obviously. So I mean, I don't want to question the work, right? I completely believe in it. That's not the point. But the analysis that you did of the two townhouses kind of reminded me of Alessio's assembler. You have this abstraction of the square, and then you can later fill in, you know, whatever the structure is, and there are these relationships, etc. So yeah, maybe you can you know, comment on that.
I think there is a relationship. It's on. Yeah. Okay. I mean, I think there's definitely a relationship. Yeah. I mean, I don't know what to comment on it besides saying yes.
Okay,
I mean,
alright.
yeah, but I think maybe what's different is, you know, what I'm using is all 2D. And so and it's limited by 2D, you know. So, but it does allow for like embedding and subshape recognition, and it does use layers. I mean, I didn't get into all that, but it uses all that. So you can define the language in terms of that and generate with that. So I've become much more interested, and even in the student work, you can see it in the kind of fine grained details of the plan, you know, and actually producing something that looks like a drawn plan, you know, instead of an abstraction, you know. So I think that's where I don't know what I mean, there might be more relationships when we start doing things in 3D, but anyway, that's my initial thought.
Yeah, it's a question that comes with a previous comment. Of course, I've noticed the similarities. I also have studied the shape generator from Georgia Tech, also to not make duplicates when I was developing my tool, because I didn't want to redo what was already there. There's one thing that, for example, Douglas Adams famously said, if you want to study a cat and you take apart the cat, the first problem you encounter is that you have in front of you a non-functional cat. So one of the things that I was thinking when I was seeing the way you were approaching the study of Adler House is that Adler House is such a small but extremely complex spatial project, because if you look at the way in which the space works, it's a continuous challenge of the concept of the room. Are there rooms or are there not rooms? And this happens only in the absolutely fantastic way in which Can makes the slight shift in the grid, in the models, to make the space work together. If one tries to find the spatial identities in there, there's a lot of overlapping going on. And I don't know, have you thought, I think you know this obviously, have you thought about, because the difficulty that I have in teaching is exactly teaching this part. How do you approach this this question when you teach to your student?
The question of overlapping space or
the overall the effect of interrelation of the parts that causes all these overlapping identities that are there.
I would say, at least in what I've been teaching, the way that I engage that is, well, first, I'm always asking them for variation, which should give them multiple ways to study that, right? And then we usually focus on generation either in plan or with physical models. And so you can better see that, you know, kind of happening through those mediums, or you shift to a different medium. So I guess that's what I would like. If it's been in plan, shifting to section axonometric model or vice versa to try to understand them.
Any more questions?
It's just a comment regarding this discussion. Nevertheless, I think that one of the very interesting things about the process that you are developing regarding us also regarding teaching is for students to understand the rules sometimes that is not that obviously to grasp. So this exercise of go through the rules and discover the rules and explore the rules, and from the rules go to other sort of rules and rules generating rules. So within my experience of teaching, that is very good because sometimes students just, yeah, they do whatever and they try to understand or to say the rules because you ask it for it. Otherwise, they rules, yeah. Oh, should I supposed to have rules? So this kind of creating a discipline, a routine regarding the rules, I think those kind of process in terms of pedagogy, they are very interesting. Either 2D or 3Ds, they are very good in that need to embed the students within the rules mindset, if you want.
Yes, thank you. I would jump to another discussion about the agent-based to just have a broader discussion. And I was a bit wondering, and maybe we can actually then go back to one of the other, let's say the last presentation also. If you want to mimic, let's say first you wanted to mimic the agent-based modeling as it is implemented in DepthMap, and then you add the rules, let's say, for the agents which are lacking. But how are you going to, and you didn't show the last step in a way, but how are you going to validate that model? Because you don't, let's say because of course it performs differently if you add those rules, and the attractions become more important if you add them, and the agent has to go to those attractors. But how are you going to, what then, let's say, then you show that there is a difference between the original and the new model. But how do we know which one we should use if we want to understand behavior in buildings with the agents? Are you planning to do then, let's say, a proper validation of it with new data? Or how are you going to do it?
Okay. So that's the big next question, because in fact, they are a lot of different models for pedestrian behavior. But there are not so many models that show any process that might be close kind of to human embedded learning about the environment. So let's say the next stage should be choose one, map that short-term learning in a constrained way, and then try to map it up against the behavior of real people that we know, and we can interview on a real subset, so we know their prior life experience, let's say. But farther than that, it's difficult to validate, because there is not, I mean, they exist a lot of models with specific goals, you know, like the ones that I show for evacuation simulations, or hospital behavior, or disease spread when walking around. But the moment you add the layer of human experience, the only way you have to test your mapping is against the behavior of a real set of human beings. So right now, that's the debate. I don't know if that answers the question.
But because then maybe the goal can also be to just understand, let's say, how different attractions and how you position them influences, let's say, the patterns. But then we still, and then it becomes a little bit, let's say, in your direction, let's say, how to assemble the different places. Yeah, creates other rooms, but then does it still have the qualities that the first one had? So it's kind of, is the aim to explore, let's say, but then I'm a bit struggling. Is there a ground truth that we relate to or not, or is it just for exploration's sake? Can be that. I mean, that can be a thing to do. That's what we often do in design. We just sort of, but then we have our own kind of ground truth. That's we say we sort of have our judgment of that. This is good and this is bad, or this I like and this I don't like, or. But I'm a bit struggling, let's say, to what the purpose then is. But it can be just exploration, of course.
I mean, the general idea of our experiment was to improve exploration. Okay, this whole exercise started at the School of Computing about engineer versus architect debating. We can completely map human behavior. Myself debating. We can not absolutely at all map human behavior. Okay, in no way. And then we started trying to understand the existing pedestrian, different approaches, etc., etc. So we reached this point where we said, okay, let's go for the most well-known model. Let's build the framework, and then let's start adding layers. But then there is, let's say, a crossroad here. We can go and follow the path of adding different behaviors regarding attractors, perceptions of the rooms, materiality of the walls, the 3D, etc. Or we can take the path the other side at the crossroad, that is trying to understand how to add a layer of human experience or learn behavior. That's a completely different conversation. So obviously, right now we are going to the pole of the left, not the theoretical philosophical path on the right, because we are just trying to get a better tool for exploration. I don't know if that's because that opens a whole other debate about how can we map human behavior in enclosed spaces and build the spaces. So, but that's a completely different debate that then needs to feed in backwards. So that's a very big debate.
I mean, I think my interest is both like the exploration, like kind of creative exploration, but it's also this idea of imitation and replication. Like, I think, traditionally we might have said something like, you don't understand anything unless you've drawn it yourself. Like I remember, being told stuff like, if you haven't drawn it yourself, you don't really get it, or analyzed it yourself. And somehow, I mean, for me personally, trying to write about these buildings and think about these buildings, the ones I've analyzed, by having an algorithmic interpretation and varying and playing, it actually makes you understand the original more, and be able to talk about it more. So I'm not sure any of the fakes that I'm making are as good as the original, the actual designs, but they're about kind of understanding them further and kind of expanding capacity for reading those buildings through variation, I think, contrast. Yeah, yeah. Yeah, yeah. Yeah, yeah.
I think it's sorry. No, frankly, you have the okay. No, I think it's just commenting on what you just said. I think we should be careful on trying to put architecture on a scale, like, and establishing an original as a ground truth and say how closer we are or not to that as a validation method, because otherwise we establish a primarity of one example over the other, and we might miss qualities in the others. Just a passing thought around.
Well, first, I'm we worked on a similar problem, and we present the similar papers in the last, because my team was working on a professional, there was a client, the municipality, for a pedestrian movement. And well, I think you are too modest to say, because I see many, and your paper was inspiration for some of the improvements we made in our work. So I see many useful utilizations of what you made. And for example, not only you, but every study on agent ways for pedestrians, for example, use the similar things to define the positions of the urban furniture in the street. And it was very, very important for that. So your study, I think, has immediate and with profound consequences on the studies on pedestrian. So please continue. And well, we are focused. Yeah, it's always the same question. When you, well, what I expect when you are trying to understand a theory of some you said some of the observations before the work. You were trying to demonstrate something about Can has some special way of working and some features that characterize his work. And what I expected that is that you characterize Can's work. For example, what you said, it's a semantic approximation to Kant style. For example, what's a room? It's a question, it's raised by his work. So I expect that you, and of course, what are the conclusions for the work of any architect to know the solutions that one of them not inspiring one. Well, so it's that what I expect from such thing. By the way, I have made many experience on using the inductive AI, for example, draw or picture an image of a semaphore made by Can. Well, and well, not very, semaphore is difficult, but a church of overseas in the Sahara Desert, yes, perhaps it was a good idea to compare only for the sake of of the research, to compare results from shape grammars and the inductive AI. It will be very nice.
So thank you again for your fantastic presentations. Thank you.